Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel and welcome to a new real-life car review. The last one for this season because the weather is getting pretty bad and I won't be able to film much outdoors. Anyway, let's get started with this one. This is the updated Mazda 3. Unlike many other car manufacturers, Mazda works with model year updates. Most car manufacturers implement life cycle updates and don't do that every year. For the upcoming year, Mazda has big news, namely a new engine and the implanted new safety systems in the car. So without any further ado, let's have a peek at the new engine with 140 horsepower. Why the air quotes? I'll explain in a minute. I think it's a breath of fresh air in this day and age of downsizing and a lot of failing engine that Mazda goes upsizing their engine. The new 2.5 liter engine replaces the 2 liter version, which was available in 2 power outputs, namely 120 and 150 horsepower. The new 2.5 liters engine is said to have 140 horsepower. Now it's not a new engine. We know this engine from a lot of other Mazda products. I've tested this engine in the Mazda 6 2 years ago, where it had 194 horsepower. This engine is available next to the top of the range SkyActiv-X engine. That's the compression combustion engine. That's a very impressive technology. That engine has about 190 horsepower. But Mazda says this engine has 140 horsepower, and I think they do that to separate it from the SkyActiv-X. But in my experience, after driving this car for a week, and I've been driving this car very carefully, when I picked it up it only had 500 kilometers on the odometer, so I took it quite easy. But the engine is so powerful that I think it easily makes 160 horsepower, maybe 170, and there's a lot more torque than the brochure states. I believe the brochure states 238 newton meters of torque, but I think it's much closer to 300 newton meters. In this car it's made it to a 6-speed automatic transmission. There's also a 6-speed manual available. It is a mild hybrid. There's an integrated starter generator. It's a 24 volt system and it has a lithium ion battery, and this engine also has cylinder deactivation. It deactivates the outer 2 cylinders, runs on the cylinder 2 and 3. It had the same in the Mazda 6, that's cylinder deactivation system. I didn't notice it at all in that car. In this car it is noticeable. It feels like you're driving on a corrugated road. It's not disturbing in any way, but you do notice it. I'll talk about the fuel economy and performance in the driving segment. Let's close up the hood now and let's have a quick peek in the cargo area. Fun fact, for once I didn't get a top of the range trim level, so this car doesn't have an electric trunk opener, and still look how easy it is to open the trunk by yourself. Anyway, I don't have the numbers for the cargo area at hand, so I'll blink them in screen, but I will say this: it's a nice deep cargo space. It's that deep that the postal shelf is actually a 2-piece one, so it goes up in 2 sections. It's nice and square. The only thing that you have to keep in mind with this cargo space is that it doesn't have a double trunk floor, so the trunk floor is on the lower side of things, and you have a ridge that is this high. So you put your heavy grocery crates in here, keep in mind that you have to lift them in and you have to lift them out. It's not the most practical trunk floor, so to speak, but it's nice and deep, and if you have a family of 4 and you go on a 2-week holiday, it will think almost carry all your cargo. If you need a more practical car, maybe you should opt for the CX-30 or maybe the CX-5 if you want a Mazda, that is. So let's put this down. Let's see how easy that goes. Oh, it's fairly easy. And another thing is, if you have taller stuff, you have a very deep floor, as I said, but if you have taller stuff, you have to keep in mind that the rear line is very sloping, so if you have large boxes they won't fit in here. But fortunately you can fold the rear seats down and you have a large cargo space. So all in all, by its design, it's not the most practical car, but with the shape of the trunk and the ease that the rear seats fold down, you get a pretty practical car. Anyway, it's getting cold. Let's have a peek in the interior. Alright, let's quickly go through the interior of the Mazda 3. It hasn't been updated, so I want to make this quick and easy. First and foremost, the dashboard has a very clean, nicely designed aesthetic to it without being overly stylized or overly simplified like you have in Teslas and especially in modern Volvos. You do have physical buttons for the climate control panel. It's a 2-zone climate control. This version does have heated seats, but it does not have, oh, let me dial that back. It does not have a heated steering wheel. And speaking of heating, that's one of the big pros of this car, namely that the cabin heater works really well. It's in fact one of the best that I ever tested. Not only is it very fast to warm up, but Mazda also has these unique vents besides the steering column on the left and right, and within 2 kilometers of driving, no matter how cold it is, this starts to blow warm air on your lower body. That's very comfy, especially in combination with the heated seats. Another thing that I like is that they use a fairly small but widescreen infotainment screen on the dashboard, and from my point of view, I keep the camera beside my head now, is that it's not in your line of sight. It doesn't obstruct the view in any way through the front windscreen. It's not a touchscreen. Mazda placed it in such a manner that it is out of reach, so you can't reach it from your driving position. You always have to use a controller, and that in itself isn't a problem. It's very easy to operate during driving. However, when you want to enter an address in the navigation in your destination, you have to, let me show you. So here's destination. You have to go around in a circle to enter the letters and the symbols, and that's very cumbersome. It takes a long time. But on a positive note, there is speech recognition, so you can also enter your navigation destination by speaking. But it doesn't always work as nice as, for an example, Toyota products. That speech recognition is much better. Okay, now on to the gauge cluster. Mazda has a traditional gauge cluster, but I use a TFT screen for the center section, so the speedometer is digital, but it mimics the physical gauges really well. And another thing that you get are those little gauges to the left and to the right. There's a fuel economy meter, and this is a remaining range, but actually that's a redundant fuel gauge actually. And via the infotainment screen you can change the settings. You have 2 options. Personally, I would much rather have an oil temperature indicator over here instead of a secondary fuel gauge. Mazda went through great lengths to make this screen look exactly like a physical gauge cluster, so you wonder why they did it, but it's that they can blend in the trip computer and another display mode, and also you have the information for the advanced driver aid systems in the screen. Speaking of which, if you want to deactivate the lane departure warning, which I have to do on a daily basis, you have to go to the center screen, settings, that's 1 layer deep, safety settings 2 layers deep, safety alerts 3 layers deep, and in the 4th layer I can deactivate the lane departure warning. On a side note, I think this car needs a software update, because even though I have the lane departure warning switched off, it does react to the lane markings. It does want to steer me back on the road, and that's not how it's supposed to be. And also I have the traffic sign recognition turned off, but this car asks for an update of the system because the navigation data, the speed data based on navigation isn't updated. And I also have the traffic sign recognition completely turned off, but still it shows the traffic signs. But on a positive note, Mazda made a button over here, and when you push this button you can silence all the warnings of all the safety systems, so that's good. And for the rest of it, this car just needs a software update. As said, this is a mid-range trim level, so it doesn't come with leather seats. You get cloth seats, and to shear this up a little bit, you have this red stitching in the doors and on the dashboard, and also, yeah, on the seats itself. But I must say, this interior is very black, and I do wish that Mazda would offer more color options, brighter colors, lighter colors for the lower trim grades. Okay, let's continue our tour quickly. Over here you have the wireless phone charger, 2 cup holders, and as said, here's a control knob for the infotainment system, and it's nice to have a physical button for the radio. push to switch it on and off, and just a rotary function. And this start button is the memory function for your favorite settings. So if you use it in navigation mode, it pulls up a menu of your often selected destinations, and when you use it in a radio mode, it shows your favorite radio station, and so on and so forth. There's the auto hold button, but that's something that you have to activate every time when you start a car. So once it switches on, it switches off every time you stop the car. But all in all, this interior is a nice place to be. As said, it's a bit cramped in terms of height, but in terms of width, it's a fairly wide car. With this fairly high window line, it is a bit difficult for an inexperienced driver to guess how wide the car is and what your position on the road is. Anyway, let's hop into the back and see what life is like for the rear passengers. Okay, before I get in the rear, I want to point out that this section of the roof line falls in quite a bit, so when you get in, you really have to pull your head in, otherwise you would bump your head, and it happened to me a couple of times this week. Anyway, the rear passenger compartment would really benefit from having a lighter interior color. If you have lighter upholstery and a lighter roofline, this would really benefit. This is the part where the design really outweighs the practicality. I must say the seating position is good. With the seat in my driving position, I can stow my feet under the driver's seat, and yeah, the depth of the seat and the angle of the seat back itself is pretty good. But yeah, I wouldn't use the term claustrophobic as said, but this is quite cramped, and if I close the door, being an adult, I have a reasonable view towards the outside, but smaller children, even taller children, don't have that. It just feels cramped. And also there are no creature comforts like vent, charging ports or anything like that. This is really what shows that this car is a mid-range trim level. We do have an armrest with 2 cup holders, but that's about it. But as I said, seating position is good, seating comfort is good, but if you want to use this car as a family car, better opt for a CX-30 if you want a Mazda. Let's go for a drive. Alrighty folks, we're on our way. We have a nice curvy road ahead. So I'm going to assume if you're watching this review, you've probably seen other Mazda 3 reviews, and if you paid attention, you know that this is a real driver's car. The suspension and steering setup is such that it's a real engaging car to drive. It has a real nice sporty tone and feel to it without being overly sporty or even hardcore. So if you're not an experienced driver or a spirited driver, you'll also experience plenty of comfort in this car. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on the steering and suspension, just know that it's best in class from my point of view. Yeah, it stands out from Hyundai's, Toyotas. Toyotas have a lot of driving dynamics, but Mazda really stands out. This is such a fun car if you end up on mountain roads and curvy back roads like this. So anyway, I want to talk about the drivetrain, the new base engine in combination with this 6-speed automatic transmission. So as I pointed out in the under the hood segment, after driving this car for just over a week, I'm willing to bet this engine makes much more horsepower than the 140 that's stated in the brochure. Especially the torque is much higher than what the brochure says. I believe it was 238. When you're driving this car on back roads like this, not too fast but a little bit spirited, you'll notice that currently on 1400 RPM, 70 kilometers an hour, just push the accelerator a little bit and there's just instant torque. It doesn't even downshift. It relies on the torque that this large 2.5 liter 4-cylinder has, also aided by the mild hybrid system. Well, let's take this corner, make this a slow corner. Well, there's no gear indicator, so do not know what gear we're in, but with 20 kilometers an hour, I want to accelerate just a light push, and there's nice linear seamless acceleration, loads of torque. It's a real, I would say, laid back engine. It's very pleasant to drive, especially for comfort cruising. I must say I did a lot of highway driving with this car, which is just standard highway speeds, and then again the engine is very quiet. The gear ratios are such that at highway speeds, 130 kilometers an hour, the engine barely does 2,500 RPMs. And when you want to accelerate from that speed, the transmission hardly ever downshifts. So at first I thought, oh, this is a very lazy transmission. It should downshift when I push the accelerator. At first I wished it was faster to respond, but then I realized it actually works really well with the power and torque characteristics of this engine. Only when you're on a little harder acceleration it downshifts, and there's just seamless acceleration, a lot of torque. So this is a very nice engine, and the performance I experienced from this engine is much more than 140 horsepower and 230-ish Newton meters of torque. Let's do a little bit harder acceleration. Then you feel a slight boost. It's not as aggressive as the SkyActiv-X is. That is noticeably the more powerful version, but that engine relies more on revs, and this engine feels much more at ease in the lower rev range, so up to 3000 RPM. I will say this, the engine does sound nice and pulls real well above 3000 RPM, but somehow, some way or another, this engine is more pleasant to drive in the lower rev range, and it does not mean that you're driving at lower speeds. So I think this combo of engine and transmission works really well, and it's a real nice option next to the SkyActiv-X engine. That's the more engaging drivetrain for a more spirited driver, and this has a more all-round, say, Grand Tourer character to it. I must say, I really like this new 2.5 liter SkyActiv-X engine, and I think I personally prefer this over the more advanced SkyActiv-X engine. So Mazda always stayed away from downsizing, and now they're even upsizing their engine, saying it works better for fuel economy and emission, but how's that in reality? I have a small disclaimer over here. As said, this car is barely broken in when I picked it up. We have real cold weather and the car has just been idling a lot during filming, but my average fuel consumption is around 6.1, 6.2 liters per 100 kilometers over the last week. And I have to make a little assumption here. I think when the weather is better, so in summertime, we'll see an average fuel consumption of 5.8 liters per 100 kilometers. Okay folks, we're approaching the on-ramp. Let's try a little bit harder driving. We're catching up with the cars in front of us that aren't as fast as the Mazda is. Let's see if there's some room to merge, pick up some speed. There's one downshift. There we go. So this is maximum highway speed. Now we can talk about the noise in the car. I didn't say that this car is actually a very quiet car. We're driving at highway speeds and the only thing you hear is wind noise. There's a little bit of whisper, maybe you can hear it in the background. This car is currently on full winter tires, but there's no tire noise, there's no suspension noise, there are no squeaks and rattles in the interior, as you may expect for a modern car and a car of this price point. But this car is very quiet, and that combined with the laid-back attitude and the smoothness of this drivetrain make this for me a great long-distance driving car. So that's it for highway driving already. I think I've touched upon all my talking points for the driving segment, so let's head over to the middle of nowhere for my final thoughts on the Mazda 3 SkyActiv 2.5 140 horsepower. So even though the Mazda 3 is almost 6 years in production by now, it's still a very relevant car. Mazda has always implemented those model year updates to make small improvements, to fine-tune their cars, and they've done that really well. And of course with this design, it is one of the most attractive cars in its segment. As we discovered in the interior segment, it isn't the most practical family car, but all in all it isn't all too bad. If you do have a family of 4, yeah, you'd better opt for a CX-30. But anyway, if you like driving, it's good to know that this car does that really well, probably the best in its segment, without going into the special GTI or N versions of other brands. The big surprise, however, of this car is this new engine option, which, as we figured out, is much more powerful than the brochure states. It really comes close to the SkyActiv-X engine. That car, the Mazda 3 with the SkyActiv-X engine and the manual 6-speed transmission, is a true driver's car. But yeah, if you're a regular driver, you drive long distances and you set a lot on a highway or in slower traffic, I personally prefer this engine. It's a real nice engine to have in this car. And yeah, when you get on windy mountain roads or on beautiful back roads and you want to carry a little bit of speed, do know that this car has a really sporty touch to it. But overall, this car leans more towards comfort and low down torque. But I must say, when you go in a little bit of sportier driving, the 6-speed automatic transmission is really fast to respond, and if the engine starts to rev up and wind out, it's a real nice engine. So if it was my money, I would go for the 2.5 liter SkyActiv-G engine. Anyway, that's it for this real life car review. That's it for this season of real life car reviews. The weather is getting too bad to be filming outdoors, and I'll be back early next year with new test cars. Anyway, I do hope you liked following me along, and if you did, let me know by subscribing to my channel, give me a like, and if you have any questions or constructive feedback, let me know down below in the comment section. And if you want to help support the channel, you can do so by buying me a coffee. Anyway, that's it for this season. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again next year with new real life car reviews. Bye!